inspired by real-life events. Narrator Danish grew up in a quiet, semi-rural area near Rangpur, where life never felt dramatic in the way stories describe it, but instead felt repetitive, heavy, and deeply real in a way that shaped every breath of existence. And from childhood, he understood that people around him were not living with the idea of chasing dreams, but with the constant responsibility of protecting stability. And his father was a modest worker in a small local transport service who spent long hours managing goods and deliveries under pressure that never fully left his face, even when he returned home. While his mother carried the emotional architecture of the family through endless patience, making sure that even in times of scarcity, nothing visibly collapsed. And Danish grew up observing this silent discipline that defined his environment. Learning early that life was not a straight road, but a continuous negotiation between what you want and what you can survive. And in school, he was neither exceptional nor invisible, just an ordinary student who sat quietly in the middle rows, observing more than speaking, thinking more than participating, and often staring out of the classroom window, imagining a life beyond the boundaries of his town. And that imagination slowly turned into something deeper as he grew older. Not just curiosity, but a quiet dissatisfaction with the idea that life must only revolve around survival. And after completing his studies, he reached a moment where life presented him with a decision that felt simple on the surface, but extremely heavy inside. Because two paths appeared at the same time. One was a stable local administrative job in a nearby town with fixed salary, predictable routine, and social approval that came with safety, while the other was an uncertain opportunity in a startup in the city that promised nothing except instability, long hours, pressure, and the possibility of building something meaningful from nothing. And for many days, Danish did not speak about this decision openly, because every voice around him encouraged safety. Every relative repeated the importance of stability, and every logical argument supported a predictable life. But inside him, there was a persistent discomfort that refused to fade, like a question that kept returning, no matter how many times he tried to ignore it. And one evening, he sat with his father outside their home under the dim glow of a flickering light, watching the slow movement of life on the street. And after a long silence, he asked, "Baba, what if I choose the risky path and lose everything I have?" And his father looked at him for a moment with tired eyes that carried years of lived experience and said, "Losing is part of living, but never choosing is like never starting at all." And those words stayed inside Danish longer than anything else he had ever heard. And after nights of thinking, doubt, and emotional conflict, he finally made his decision to join the startup, stepping into a city environment that felt fast, unfamiliar, and unpredictable from the very beginning. Because the office was small, slightly disorganized, filled with young people trying to create something without fully knowing how. And nothing felt stable, not even the direction they were moving in. And in the beginning, Danish tried to adapt quickly, working long hours, learning systems, observing everything carefully, trying to prove himself through effort and consistency. But soon, he realized that effort alone does not guarantee direction. And there were nights when he returned to his rented room completely exhausted, sitting in silence while the ceiling fan above him rotated endlessly as if time itself had no destination. And during those moments, he would think about home, about his mother preparing simple meals with care, about his father returning late from work with silent fatigue, and a strange mix of guilt and determination would rise inside him because every step forward in the city felt like a step away from the life he had always known. And in the startup, he met people like Farhan, Sohel, Imtiaz, Sohela, Rafi, Adil, and Aman, each carrying their own invisible struggles, each trying to turn uncertainty into something meaningful. And together they formed a fragile team held together, not by stability, but by shared confusion, hope, and silent pressure. And often they would sit late at night, surrounded by unfinished ideas, whiteboards filled with half-complete strategies, and empty cups of tea that had gone cold hours ago. And Imran once said, with a tired half-smile, "If this works, people will call us lucky geniuses. And if it fails, no one will even remember we tried." And they all laughed softly, but the silence that followed was heavier than the joke itself. And as months passed, the startup entered a difficult phase where funding delays began affecting salaries, clients became inconsistent, and pressure slowly turned into an invisible weight that followed everyone everywhere. And Danish found himself becoming more observant, more thoughtful, speaking less, but analyzing more. Because he realized that in unstable environments, reaction creates chaos, but observation creates direction. And during this time, his family back home also began facing subtle difficulties, especially his father, whose health slowly weakened after years of continuous labor, though he never expressed it openly. And Danish would call home regularly, trying to sound normal, hearing reassurances that everything was fine, not realizing that those reassurances were often meant to protect him from distraction. Until one night, everything changed when his phone rang late, and his mother's voice came through trembling and unstable, saying, "Your father collapsed today." And in that instant, everything inside Danish froze completely, because suddenly deadlines, meetings, and ambitions felt meaningless compared to the fear of losing someone who had always been his silent foundation. And he rushed back home immediately, traveling through a journey that felt longer than physical distance. And when he reached the hospital and saw his father lying weak, connected to machines, breathing slowly and irregularly, Danish felt something inside him break in a way he could not explain, because the man he had always seen as strong now looked fragile in a way he was never prepared for. And he sat beside him, holding his hand, feeling the weight of years of sacrifice inside that single touch. And his father slowly opened his eyes and said with effort, "Don't stop your life because of me. Just make sure it has meaning." And those words entered him like something permanent that could not be removed. And after days of uncertainty, his father's condition stabilized, but never fully returned to what it once was. And Danish went back to the city carrying a different version of himself, one that no longer saw success as ambition alone, but as responsibility. And the startup soon reached one of its most critical phases, where everything felt like it could collapse at any moment. And one rainy night, when the office was nearly empty and silence filled every corner, Danish sat with Farhan and Imran, listening to the rain hitting the glass like a slow reminder of uncertainty. And Farhan said quietly, "Maybe this is where most people stop." And Imran replied after a pause, "Or maybe this is where people finally understand who they really are." And Danish stayed silent for a long time, feeling everything he had lived until that moment collide inside him. The struggle, the fear, the responsibility, the memory of his father, the distance from home. And then he finally spoke slowly. "If we stop now, everything becomes just pain. But if we continue, even pain becomes part of something meaningful." And that night, they did not quit. Instead, they rebuilt everything from the ground up, rethinking strategies, restructuring operations, learning from mistakes instead of avoiding them, and slowly, step by step, things began to change, not suddenly but gradually like light, returning after a long darkness. And years passed with continuous effort, and Danish changed deeply through that journey, becoming more grounded, more patient, more aware that success is not about speed but about endurance. And one evening after a long day, he stood on the rooftop of the office building with Farhan and Imran beside him, watching the city lights stretch endlessly into the horizon. And Imran said quietly, "We almost gave up so many times." And Danish replied with calm certainty, "Yes, but every time we continued, we built a stronger version of ourselves." And in that moment, he understood something permanent. That life is not defined by how easy the path is, but by the decision to keep walking when the path becomes uncertain. And every hardship carries a lesson that only time reveals. And every choice shapes a future version of yourself you will one day meet with understanding. And as the wind moved across the city, he realized that true strength is not never falling, but choosing to rise again after every fall. And the real meaning of life is not found in avoiding struggle, but in transforming it into direction. Because in the end, a person is not measured by the comfort they choose, but by the resilience they build when comfort disappears. And that truth stayed with him like a quiet light that never faded, reminding him that every ending people fear is often just the beginning of finally becoming who they were always meant to be. And that realization became the silent foundation of everything he would continue to build for the rest of his life.